Hello, beautiful soul, and welcome to the Little Reader's house. I'm the Little Reader, also known as Amanda, and you, my friend, are in my house. Welcome, get cozy, get comfy, greet our mutual friend, Fluorite. This fluorite crystal, I believe, has a hint of purple in it. Hinty! Oh, and you can see there's a little sparkle there. Oh. Magical little crystal, never before featured on the show in a transmission. So welcome you. We're here, we're taking in the vibes. Let me get a look at you. Let me feel the situation. Well, you're looking like a radiant piece of divinity in form. But how are you feeling? What's going on in here? Let me know. Let's take some deep breaths. Would you? Take some with me? Just let the eyes float closed if you can, wherever you are. And then if the nostrils are available, let's breathe in through the nostrils and out through the nostrils, just a few times together. And just let everything go that you can. For a moment, just pretend that there is only now. Beautiful. You can float the eyes back open if you'd like butterflies, or keep them closed if you're cozy and relaxed somewhere safe where you're not driving, ideally. I think it's time for a story time. Story time with the Little Reader. But what story will we tell? I'm thinking it's going to be the time that I felt the witness take over. Dun 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 dun. It sounds like a possession story. So, here we go. Once upon a time. No, I'm just kidding. It was... Well, here's the thing. I have intellectually, as Amanda, the Little Reader, been interested in spirituality as an intellectual concept for well over a decade. That's not that long. I don't know why I said it with so much weight. Well over a decade. I'm a kid. I think I'm like early 30s. 31. So, but intellectually, I was always intrigued by the idea of the witness. Like, oh, what is this? I think Eckhart Tolle talks about it. Does he talk about it? Does he call it that? I can't recall right now. But this concept that you are awareness, it is something that I had heard. It had never really resonated. It resonated as a concept. That's the best way I can explain it. In the mind, it tickled. I was like, oh yeah, I can really get behind this intellectually. I love the idea that I'm not limited to the form, that, I'm eternal and all the powers. I was also really hyped up from religion. I'd been hyped up on religion for decades, a couple of decades prior to that. How many decades have I been alive? Again, so it's not like don't let the time give this any additional weight. Let the intensity give it weight. When I say I was hyped up by religion, I mean that I was raised in such a religious environment that everything from scholastic to recreational endeavors were religion-centric. And even at that time, I loved the intellectual concepts that I was ingesting with my mind. Now, it was also a different time in terms of human consciousness. And I remember the time, the 90s, the 2000s prior to 2010. It was a different time for human consciousness. Technology was evolving differently. So everything was very intellectual. This idea of awaken the heart was Well, that's kind of new, broadly speaking. Certain sectors have it, certain groups have it, but in terms of broad strokes, it's kind of new. Back then, it was all about the mind, even in religious and spiritual circles. So if you understood anything about the divine, it was through an intellectual understanding of concepts. You're studying words on a page. You are memorizing. You are repeating. You are affirming. But all this work is in the mind. Anything about the heart, any heart experience is... Oh, the stomach is back. Welcome back. I don't know if that was picked up by the mic. But everything that was experienced, anything that was experienced through the heart was really abstract. And it had to be... Like if you wanted to experience these concepts as emotional, you had to link some kind of emotion to them. So if you wanted to feel the divine, back in my day when I was a wee tot, you had to play music or get a communal sharing together. Get a large group of people who are singing like a concert vibe, and get the endorphins that flow through movement or the oxytocin that comes from group. That had to stimulate the emotion. There was no, like the mind and the heart just weren't linked at this time in human consciousness. It was all very intellectual. So growing up in that environment and then becoming an adult and shifting away from religion, strictly religion, broadening it up to a little more inclusive perspective that was looking at different belief systems, there began to be more excitement, more intrigue, and again, more intellectual curiosity. And where we've been historically speaking and with human consciousness, I think maybe this is something that you can relate to, sweet soul. Intellectual curiosity can be the beginning of the spiritual journey. Then I put it all kind of to bed and got on with my life in terms of the form. Went through a variety of experiences, all the 20s stuff on paper, university and relationships, family. Was there much travel? Meh. I don't know. Maybe not so much travel. Just getting out there, getting in there, different jobs, different environments, different circumstances. And everything was pretty cool until we started to have some heart awakening experiences, which for me came in the form of grief. After experiencing grief for a prolonged period of time, it was like it snowballed. It came from different angles. There were certain circumstances that began grief, and then it sort of just built. And then there were things I didn't even realize I was grieving that I was grieving. And that intellectual curiosity that had registered so much information about religion and spirituality did not serve me. It did not serve me at all. I mean, it served, of course, everything helps everything, is a delightful Matt Kahn would say somewhere. Love that spiritual teacher. But it didn't directly serve in the way that one might hope. This bolster of faith and a beacon of light and hope and all that stuff. And it came to my attention at that time that perhaps intellectually learning and contemplating concepts is not the same as having a spiritual practice. Womp, womp, womp. Yeah. So, that was a tough learn. When my mental health deteriorated in terms of the grief became so overwhelming that I could no longer rely on thought to sustain my life, which is something I'd done all my life. Thought was how I sustained my life. The thought of this, the thought of that. Imagining this, imagining that, rolling around concepts in my mind. Oh, what a thinker I was, darling. Just the always in the head, imagining. And I have had many, many clairsentient experiences and clairvoyant experiences. Psychic phenomenon was not strange to me. I'd conducted energy healing and seen, not with my literal eyes, well, sometimes, extra dimensional phenomenon and just things. It's not that I was detached from the spiritual world, but I was still experiencing it all through an intellectual place. I was still researching and studying and aspiring to learn and understand. And what I discovered in the throes of grief and loss and change, what we would call a tower moment in the tarot, mixed with the death card, mixed with the 3 of swords, mixed with the 5 of cups, mixed with the 10 of wands and the 10 of swords, you name it, the stress, the turbulence. What it did on the journey was break down the mental faculties, the mental strategies that I had used to sustain all kinds of beliefs. And even though I'd witnessed supernatural phenom with my own eyeballs and felt it in my body and chakras and auras and, again, name it, demons, ghosts, aliens, again, name it, experienced. And yet, all of the intellectual understanding in the world failed my ass when the time for it was needed. When, if all that learning was to be useful at some point, that would have been the time. Instead, I could not find solace in my thoughts. I could not find solace in my mind. No thought gave me a dopamine hit. No belief made the day worth waking up for. There was no respite and no rest from the oppressive feelings of just the entire spectrum of distress. Grief, loneliness, regret, sorrow, apathy, depression, numbness, anxiety, sadness. There was just no respite, and the thoughts weren't cutting the cake. And that was a big shifting point in my spiritual journey, because even with experience, I realized I had processed even my most profound spiritual experiences through the mind. And now I was having a crisis of the heart. And I had never looked at that before, genuinely looked at that. I'd always had cushy things to rely on. I'd always had a big family, plenty of distractions, lots of friends, a radiant social life, opportunities, a external working environment where I could go, get out of the house, visit people, a pet, a beloved pet. There had been so many things that sustained me with feel-good chemicals coursing through the body, distractions too, just cushy pleasures that I relied on without realizing it. Meanwhile, processing all I'd ever learned and taken in both religiously and spiritually and firsthand through the mind, and I thought I was set aroni. And fortunately, life gently took me by the shoulder and said, Amanda, you don't even exist right now. Your soul is so dormant. It's not to say that nothing I ever did prior to the point I will soon describe to you was valuable. It's not to say that I didn't leave wonderful impact with friends and family and have a charming persona and create a positive ripple. It's not to say that the effect of me as a pattern existing in the world was negative or bad or worthless or pointless. Spirit has made it clear time and time again, right here in the house, that conscious or unconscious, the value is equal in Spirit's eyes. So it doesn't matter if you're in pattern and form exclusively, or if you're spending your time in this witness perspective I'm about to describe, it's all valuable to Spirit. But it was a shock to me to discover that I had not been experiencing life for much of that time. We said it on yesterday's transmission. Why am I broke? It came up. The mind is only a fraction of the awareness that we are, that is experiencing this life. So if we choose to filter everything through the mind, every problem, every solution, every experience, every learning, every aha moment, if we're living exclusively through this place, we're missing out on a whole lot of life. And I had no idea. I did not have a clue. So when grief showed up at my door, in a variety of forms, to a point that it was an ego death a day, sometimes multiple. Sometimes it was just really being a shadow of a person. That made the light in the chest begin to flicker on. It made me realize that there was a lot in this place that wasn't looked at, that wasn't attended to, that wasn't loved or nurtured or cared for, because it was getting no awareness. It was getting no presence. There was a whole house here and it was empty, a mansion even, a throne room, a palace, that's a synonym for mansion, an empire, a universe. And I'd never looked at it. Never had to. I had been just as avoidant of joy and bliss and peace as I had of pain and sorrow and grief. So, then there was that. That's how my practice shifted from an intellectual one to a heart-based one. That is how my desire to meditate shifted from loving the legends of the yogis and the saints and the prophets, and loving the mythos of magic and occult, and loving the idea and even the experience of miracles and healings and energy and manifestation. I shifted from admiring and loving and being intellectually curious about those things for what they could offer me to realizing that if I intended to survive on this planet, to live, I was going to have to dig deep as shit to find real reasons. And they were not going to be intellectual reasons. And it turns out when all the comforts in your life are stripped away, or all the things that you value most, even if you don't realize that you value them when you value them, and all you're left with is intellectual concepts and beliefs, at least for me, I suddenly understood that that is not enough. There's a little fly that just flew toward my face. Hello and goodbye. I'm sure it'll be back. Yeah, that's not enough. So, my practice changed. I was already meditating. I was already, as you know, I was already in the spiritual world. But I wasn't spiritual. Which is crazy. I was mentally spiritual. Again, operating off of the spirituality washed version of these forms and patterns. So I knew the lingo, I knew the words. Boy, did I know the words. I had read the books, had read the texts, ancient, spiritual, biblical, you name it. You know, I'm a reader. I'm the little reader. I was in it. I was all over it. It was all over me. But I was not spiritual in the way that I think it's meant to be spiritual. The shifting in my practice moved from transcendental meditation exclusively, which is the repetition of a mantra, and prayer, and asana, which is movement through postures for the body, to still incorporating and including those things, but beginning to hold space. The practice took on a life of its own. I wasn't using techniques and tactics that I'd been trained in anymore. Suddenly, forces were prompting me and pushing me in directions to intensely begin to watch what was going on in the heart space as I grieved, intentionally and intensely and intently begin to watch my patterns. The witnessing started almost on its own, without any intellectual catalyst. It wasn't that I found a new technique of how to witness, how to wake up. I'd read about it, oh sure. And in the past, when I was happy, I'd been able to dip my toe into it for about 2 seconds before I got bored and was like, nah, I'd rather think lofty spiritual thoughts, thank you very much, and then manifest, a new car or something. But now, at the time when I was at the height of no pleasures, nothing but me and my pains, I had no choice but to watch. And that began to evolve on its own and rather quickly. I found that the more you watch, not only the easier it becomes, but the more comfortable and addicting it became, because it was a respite from deep pain. And even though I could still feel the pain and the sorrow and the existential angst, in the witness perspective, suddenly there was a comforter, a bestie, a homie, a bud, a pal. So here's the story I wanted to tell you. We're 26 minutes in, and I'm going to tell you the story. That was all the lead up. That was the intro. The day I experienced the witness perspective intensely, I was completing an asana practice, yoga asana. So there are 8 limbs of yoga, and the movements and the postures are just one. They may even be a subcategory, but no, I think they're a whole limb. And I'm doing some moves, and I got this thing where I like to go into a handstand, and I use a prop for it. Prolonged handstand. I think we were around the 17-minute mark. And I'm in this handstand, and a wave of grief hits me. And I'm weeping, but also am so stubborn that I can't get out of this handstand posture, because I have this rule that I have to stay in it, because if I break the rule, I suppose the form is afraid, or the mind is afraid, that I'll just start breaking the rules and never be able to hold the posture for the selected duration of time anymore. So I'm weeping in a handstand that I refuse to get out of. Yes, I am recognizing the absurdity of this as I speak, and I kind of love that. And of course, my nose starts to run, and the tears are gushing, and it's funny because when you're upside down, they're running into your scalp, which is weird. I guess maybe this is like what astronauts go through. So I'm there, I'm crying, and I'm just like really basking in the sadness that is sweeping the nation of the little reader at this time. And as I'm there, I start to choke and kind of can't breathe very much because it's crying. It's there's snot, there's snot. There's tears. It's a hot mess. And yet I'm like, we're not breaking this handstand, y'all. So let's just feel it. Let's just feel into every absolute second of this misery. My shoulders are burning. At this point, we're probably a little bit past the 17-minute mark. And I don't know, handstand for 17 minutes, it really starts to get to you. Everything hurts. I'm sad. Life sucks. And rather than push even a hair away from it in that moment, for whatever reason, my awareness was guided to just embrace the absolute shit of that situation in every way. Just full on take it in. This is juicy. Let's enjoy it. I know that sounds weird, but that's kind of what was going on. And my awareness just embraced the form and the mind and every part of that suffering that was occurring in that moment, which did not make the suffering go away, for the record, but instead it transmuted it. It eased it into something profound that I cannot really express. It's not that the pain of my shoulders or my arms or the physical body, which is trying to maintain this position, nor is it the frustration of being unable to breathe or all this tears, can't see, can't do anything but shake and cry. And there wasn't any anger involved in this, but it was when they say crying bitterly in books, that is the vibe, just like this wretched melancholy, and embracing that fully witnessing it occur, there was this like fusion. It was atomic. The alarm went off on my timer, and I came down from that handstand, and I crouched into this little ball and wept and wept. And as I did so, suddenly I was aware of the sorrow and the pain and the grief, and at the same time seeing myself almost out of body. But it wasn't out of body. I wasn't floating above myself or somewhere else in the room. It was just a sensation that I was bigger than the little ball on the floor. And at the same time, there was a part of me that was intensely protective and loving and supportive of that ball on the floor, as if I had just become aware that not only was I inhabiting the form, feeling immense pain, inhabiting the mind, feeling immense frustration, inhabiting the spirit, feeling immense release, but I was also every single spirit guide I had ever had. I was also every ancestor who had ever lived. I was also the room, the floor that I was on, the air, the breath itself, and the breather. Everything was harmonized. Everything was one. And I felt myself also as the love that was embracing and sustaining the life of the person who was on the floor, recovering from a lengthy headstand, but also recovering from and feeling through so much. And the witness perspective dawned. After a few moments, all the crying subsided, but it didn't disappear just like okay, it's over, we're cleaning our hands off, like goodbye, no more tears, we're all good, everything's we're fine, like the way I'd cried in the past, the way many of us cry, which is like you go through it and then you like pep yourself up and you move on, you try to, or a cloud surrounds you for the rest of the day. Instead, there was this shift. I got up from that place on the floor and I was watching myself. I was watching myself as if I was occupying the air, the space around the form, and also within the form, and also within the mind, and also within the heart. All parts felt occupied. And I followed myself about that day, and it was like something had awakened. It was like an old, forgotten friend that I'd had and remembered having, and I suddenly could remember other times in my life, particularly in early childhood when the witness perspective had been present. And I'd forgotten what that felt like, which is insane, because as soon as I remembered what it felt like, I remembered it unlocked many memories that had always been there. I'd always been connected to them, but for some reason I couldn't access them because I'd been so far away from that headspace. When I say headspace, I don't mean mental space, but that way of perceiving had been so distanced from the adolescent and adult versions of me that I couldn't seem to access those memories with as much meaning as they had when I came to them again now. So I'm walking around the house feeling this presence with me, a divine presence, a sacred presence that I'm also aware is me. The witness is me, and yet it feels like a friend. It reminded me again of being a kid. And there was this levity that I had as a kid. It was this insulary, or perhaps a better way to say it is an insulation that protected me from so much. It was like before something could hurt me emotionally or intellectually, or even physically in a lot of ways, there was this layer of awareness, like a friendly ghost that was keeping me safe. And in my adolescence and adulthood, and in the distractions of life, and in the fast pace and the speed, and I must say, the mental focus, I had lost use for that. I just let it go because I didn't know it was something that required attention. I didn't know. I didn't even know what I had. But when it came back, it was like, hello, old friend. There was also a big release of this what is called, I believe, a chip on the shoulder socially. Some people say you have a chip on your shoulder. It's like something you're ashamed of, or an inferiority complex, or just like a raw edge. And somewhere in adolescence and adulthood, I developed this chip on my shoulder, but it was really quite on both shoulders. It was the entire thing. It was an identity that I developed without even realizing it. That I had to be a certain way, or there were ways I needed to behave, whether it was for people, places, or things, or simply for myself. I really had bought into, gotten drunk on my own Kool-Aid, that I am a certain type of way, I like a certain type of thing, I need a certain type of thing. I just boxed myself into too many rows, too many lines, too many concepts, just too much strict thinking. Even if my thinking was liberal, it was too much identifying with the mind. And when I got the witness back that day, it was like at the same time that came back, I let go of this very dramatic, edgy, really like a shard of glass right through my heart, that I had to be punished, that I needed to suffer, that I deserved this pain and the grief and the suffering, and that's never going to get any better, and this is my life. And there was so much claiming. Mine, my sorrow, my life, my tiny little... My mother is Cuban. She's from Cuba. And there's a saying in Spanish that the Cubans share, which is something to the effect of drowning in a drop of water. And I had obviously heard that my whole life, knew all about it, of course, intellectually understood it. Why would anyone ever do that? Drown in a drop of water? How silly, how dramatic. But once again, you can understand everything with the mind, or at least I could, and then be living in complete nonsense. So as the witness came back, I was simultaneously taking out this shard, this chip on my shoulder that really told me that everything was about me. Everything was about me, and even my sorrow and my grief were about me, and the punishment of it all, and just, the woes, and how was I going to solve this one this time? Or, now, just another wave of grief I have to deal with. Oh, woe to me. And the me-centric thinking was something that I had caught on to intellectually, but once again was trying to resolve intellectually, sorry microphone, up until that point. So I'd already become aware of, as a meditator and a thought watcher, I'd already noticed like, oh, your thinking is awfully me-centric. But this was a mental judgment getting put down on more mental judgments. And so I was trying to, shift that and service, and there were ways I was trying to balance it out all intellectually. But when the witness came back, invited by me in a moment of embracing the suffering, embracing the truth, not trying to change or resist a thing, but just diving in willingly to the moment exactly as it was, choking on my own snot, tears going into my ears and into my scalp and into my head, just the whole thing. It was just a ludicrous moment. As I describe it now and recognize, again, the absurdity of it is just top tier. But the experience of it, there's divinity in the absurd. So as I invited that witness in and took that shard out, the remembrance of this way of being that overrides intellectual understanding completely. It made a lot of things make sense, but in a way, there was also so much of a distance, a yawning distance between the bliss of simply being with things as they are versus trying to do anything with the truth of that information. So yes, now there was a first-hand understanding of the witness perspective. And simultaneously, there was absolutely no urge to do anything with that, but to just experience it. That day that the witness became all-encompassing, it took all of my awareness. Well, I was still able to be in the form and in the mind, but primarily I was seated in this position of watching with unconditional love and grace. And it changed me quite a bit. It interrupted me. And it saved me. The witness perspective. It has to be experienced to feel the magic in it. It can take any combination of practice or just a sudden moment of choice, necessity. But 10 out of 10 would recommend. It's the gateway to peace. And understanding that can't be communicated. It's not a problem solver. Because it helps you realize there are no problems. It's not a magic trick. Because it helps you to realize that everything's already magic. It's just something you got to try on. And then keep trying on. Keep trying on. It went away after that day. It didn't stick around permanently the way it did, the way it permeated me for hours after that experience. But it, after that experience, was so easy to summon and completely shifted the way that I did and do everything that I did and do and did. It was a game changer. So, that was story time. A little story time to give you an insight into me, the little reader. Thanks so much for being here. If you listened to that, thank you so much for listening. What an honor. And we will be back to our regularly scheduled programming with channeled messages from Spirit tomorrow, very likely, unless suddenly another story time arises. But I'd love to hear your experiences with the witness perspective, or any questions you have about anything, really. It's a gift to share the space with you. It's a gift to have you in my home and to even have the privilege of being able to tell these stories and flow with you. So thank you. Thank you so very much. Until we meet again tomorrow, I am sending you all the love I've got. Always more, never less. Because you are so very worthy of it.